means if this shading on the land represents mountains, what do you guys think about the way that Greece looks? Is it flat? Is it elevated? Taylor? Yeah, there are a lot of mountains. I want you to keep those two things in mind as we talk about ancient Greece today. So I have a few quick definitions. These shouldn't take you more than a couple of seconds to write down, but I wanted us to get clear on a couple of things before we learn today's skill and before we talk too much about philosophy, which I'm going to define in a second. The first is a city-state. This is reviewed from Sumer. A city-state is a city that acts like a country. What you see up here is reflected in your guided notes, so please write down the definition of city-state, which is a city that acts like a country. The second definition I want to give you is Athens. And this is a bit cut off, but Athens was a democratic city-state in ancient Greece. Who can tell me what democracy means? Mr. Thomas was talking about different forms of government the other day. Yes, Nick one. Not a few people. Yes, Nate. A lot of people. The people hold power. Put your backpack on the floor. So, Daquan, what is democracy? All the people hold power. Exactly. Athens was a democratic city-state. Two more quick definitions. The first of the two final definitions is philosophy. Philosophy is the study of the world around us and its nature. This is going to be important because we're talking about three important men today who spent their lives studying and practicing philosophy, which is the study of the world around us and its nature. And finally, if philosophy is the study of the world around us and its nature, then philosophers studied the world and they asked questions about why the world was the way it was, and they asked questions about important concepts like justice and virtue, which you see written here at the end. Okay, now that we're clear on those concepts, who can read for me, please, the objective that we have today? Up here on the board or on the first page of your guided notes. Nate, I'm sorry? Justice and virtue. Who can read for me the objective? Yeah, Taylor.
Students will be able to evaluate the ideas of
Socrates,
Plato, and
Aristotle. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Turn the page, please. We're going to do some pronunciation in just a second, but I want to get us digging in to today's skill. We're at the top of page 3 now, and who can read for me what today's skill is? Today's skill is, yes, Nate. Yeah, exactly. Evaluating a historical idea. I'm going to trigger you. Thanks. Evaluating a historical idea. This process has a few steps. The process of evaluating a historical idea has 4 steps, actually. The first step is identifying main ideas. You identify the main ideas of the historical idea. The second thing that you do is you write what makes sense and what doesn't. The first step, identify main ideas. The second step, write what makes sense and what doesn't. The third step is write a concluding sentence. So first step, pick out the main ideas. Second step, who can tell me the second step? Yes, Taylor.
write what makes sense and what does not make sense.
Write what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. The third step is write a concluding sentence about what makes sense and what doesn't. And the fourth step is ask how the idea might be relevant for your life. Ask how the idea might be relevant for your life. Perfect. Those are the 4 steps. So we're going to explore a couple of different historical ideas today. And those historical ideas come from 3 men, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Oh yeah, sure. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who all practiced philosophy, which is the study of the nature of the world around us. We're going to do this by reading about each of these men in turn, and we're going to start by reading about Socrates. We're now on page 3, and we're going to read this passage. You guys are getting really good at the clapping for main ideas thing, so instead of reading once through for comprehension and then reading through a second time and me clapping, We're just going to read it once through, and I'm going to clap when I hear main ideas. If you notice, page 3 and page 4 are a piece of text and then a data table. Yes? The fourth one is ask how it might be relevant to your life. Yes? Taylor, what's the third one?
Write a concluding sentence about what makes sense and what doesn't.
Yeah. The third is write a concluding sentence about what makes sense and what doesn't. Okay, let's start reading. So remember, we're going to read once through, we're going to popcorn around the room. I'm going to identify main ideas, and then we're going to put them in the table on the next page when we're finished. When I clap and identify a main idea, I'd like you can keep it there, I'd like you to underline it, please. So let's get started reading. Nate, would you read, starting with Ancient Greece had many famous philosophers?
Ancient Greece had many philosophers.
Louder, please.
Ancient Greece had many philosophers. Among them, Socrates is perhaps the most famous, but the least understood. The reason for that is because Socrates never wrote anything down. After he died in 300 BC, many of his supporters, such as Plato, Aristotle, and
Xenophon. There's a pronunciation guide next to it.
Xenophon tried not to preserve his money, so they wrote books about him.
Great. Teresa, would you pick up with in their work?
In their work, they likely to portray him doing what he was known best for, making conversation. They published his dialogues and kept his ideas floating. But since those sources were not firsthand and were often conflicting, it is impossible to tell if they truly reflected Socrates' views.
Socrates' views. Marquise, pick up with Socrates, please.
Socrates was famous for ignoring his family and spending time in crowded public places. Wherever ancient Athenians, people from Athens, would
Come together. Yep.
congregate. Usually he would throw out a question and let people answer. When they responded, he would then ask more questions and impress them deeper.
Great, okay, there's a main idea. So please underline, usually he would throw out a question and let people answer it. When they responded, he would then ask more questions and press them to think deeper. That is one main idea, and that's going to end up in our table on the next page. Kumir, would you pick up with, sorry for interrupting you, Marquise. Kumir, would you pick up with, as the dialogue continued?
As the dialogue continues, those who thought themselves knowledgeable will suddenly find themselves not as wise. Discouragement made many second guess their beliefs. This also made many uncomfortable and even angry. This process of asking one question after another is today known as the
Socratic method. There we go. That's the second main idea. This process of asking one question after another is today known as the Socratic method, named after Socrates. Janie, would you pick up with, in addition to asking lots of questions of other people, please?
In addition of asking
Louder, please.
a lot of questions of other people about things like virtue and justice,
Socrates.
Socrates had his own beliefs. He believed that living a good life came from knowing yourself completely.
There we go. That's another main idea. Socrates believed that living a good life came from knowing yourself completely. He also believed that no one knowingly does wrong. You can underline that also. That's another main idea. So far the main ideas I have underlined, and make sure you have these underlined also, are usually he would throw out a question and let people answer it. When they responded, he would ask more questions. This process of asking one question after another is the Socratic method. Living a good life comes from knowing yourself completely, and he also believed that no one knowingly does wrong. Great. Janie, would you finish that paragraph?